I've heard that story too many times. You snag a cheap 61-key synth off a clearance rack, you get excited about the shiny interface, you bring it home, and within a week you're wrestling with limited polyphony, clunky voice switching, and a lack of real expressive control. The regret builds fast, and suddenly you're wondering if you should have saved a little extra and gone for something that actually holds up in a gig or a studio session. That's the exact dilemma I faced before I started looking at Yamaha's flagship line, and the question I kept asking myself was, does the Montage M6 feel like the smarter buy, or is it just another premium price tag without the payoff? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I spent a solid week testing the M6 in 3 very different environments: a home studio where I layer pads for ambient tracks, a small club gig where I needed instant sound changes between songs, and a rehearsal room where a bandmate was trying to replace a traditional analog bass synth. What struck me right away was how the instrument's 400-note polyphony actually matters in practice. In my home mixes, I can stack 4 or 5 complex pads, each with long release times, and still have room for a soaring lead and a rhythmic arpeggio without any voice stealing. In a live setting, that same capacity lets me hold a chord progression, trigger a drum-like sequence, and then switch to a soaring solo without the sound cutting out. It's not just a number on a spec sheet, it's the freedom to think bigger while you play. The first thing a potential buyer worries about is whether the synth will feel intuitive enough to get into the creative flow, especially if you're coming from a more straightforward workstation. The Montage M6 keyboard action, with its FSX feel and Aftertouch, actually delivers a tactile response that mimics a high-end piano and lets you add pressure-sensitive nuance to each note. When I was layering a gritty bass line for a metal track, the Aftertouch let me push the tone deeper on the fly, which saved me from having to program a separate modulation lane. For a producer who spends hours tweaking parameters in a DAW, that real-time expressiveness can shave off a lot of edit time. Now, let's talk about the sound engines, because that's where the Montage truly differentiates itself. The ANX engine is Yamaha's answer to the analog-style synth crowd, and it doesn't just approximate, it recreates the saturation and harmonic complexity you'd expect from a hardware analog rig. I used it to craft a warm, evolving pad for a film score, and the result held up against a genuine analog synth I own. The textures were rich, the modulation possibilities were deep, and the engine behaved predictably when I automated filter sweeps. The other 2 engines complement this by offering FM and sample-based synthesis, so you can hop from classic electric piano tones to futuristic metallic textures without loading external gear. One of the most practical strengths I noticed is the seamless sound switching. In a live band scenario, I used the M6 to cover both a synth lead and a string ensemble within the same song. With most workstations, you'd have to pause, scroll through menus, and hope the transition doesn't drop a beat. The Montage's switching is literally instant. You press a dedicated button and the new patch slides in while the old one fades out, all without audible glitches. It's the kind of reliability that keeps you from second-guessing a song arrangement on stage. On the software side, the expanded SoftSynth plugin lets you bring the entire M6 palette into your DAW. I loaded the plugin into a Logic project and was able to automate the same parameters I could on the hardware, meaning the synth isn't a studio-only piece that loses its value when you move to a laptop. This dual workflow is a big win for anyone who wants to record ideas quickly at home and then pull the same sound into a full production later. That said, there are a couple of trade-offs that matter if you're budgeting carefully. First, the size and weight. The M6 is a full-size 61-key unit with a solid metal chassis, so it's not something you'll easily toss into a backpack for a weekend gig. If you're a traveling solo act who needs a compact synth, the Yamaha MODX series or even a Korg Minilog XD might feel less like a logistical hurdle. Second, the learning curve. While the interface is logically organized, the sheer depth of the 3 engines and the myriad performance controls can overwhelm someone who's used to a unideal versatile synth. I spent a few evenings just mapping out my favorite sounds before I could play fluidly, so if you're looking for a plug-and-play experience, you might need to set aside some prep time. Who should consider the Montage M6? If you're a serious composer, a touring keyboardist, or a producer who wants both deep sound design and reliable stage performance, this synth hits the sweet spot. The 400-note polyphony, expressive keyboard, and